On a cold morning along a Georgia highway, a black mechanic quietly struggled to support his family and his daughter's dream of going to school. Suddenly he spotted a single mother and her son stranded on the roadside. Without hesitation, he helped fix their car for free, then drove away without a word. It seemed like just another quiet act of kindness, until the mother uncovered a hidden network of silent angels. What happened next would change the mechanic's life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the thick blanket of gray hanging over rural Georgia. A low mist hovered over the highway, quiet except for the hum of cars speeding past, too fast to notice the black pickup truck idling on the shoulder. Inside that truck sat Ezekiel Brown, 38. Shoulders broad from years working under lifted hoods, dark skin sun-worn, and calloused hands resting on the steering wheel. His hair was cropped short, salt beginning to touch the edges. He wore faded jeans, a work shirt with his name stitched in cursive, and boots stained with oil and sweat. But it wasn't the truck or the man inside it that made that moment unforgettable. It was what he did next. Ezekiel had just dropped off a rebuilt transmission to a veteran's widow an hour east. He should have been heading home to his wife Lana and their daughter Naomi, 6 years old, with a gap in her teeth and a dream of becoming a teacher. But traffic on the left lane caught his eye. People were swerving, some slowing just long enough to gawk before speeding away again. That's when he saw it. A white SUV sat crookedly on the shoulder, steam curling from the hood like smoke from a dying fire. Standing next to it, frantically waving her arms, was a woman, white, mid-30s, in business slacks and a sweater too light for the morning chill. Beside her, a young boy, maybe 9 or 10, clung to her coat, eyes wide, face pale. Ezekiel's fingers tapped the steering wheel twice before he exhaled and pulled over. He parked behind the SUV and stepped out. The cold bit through his sleeves, gravel crunched beneath his boots. The woman turned fast when she heard him. Her voice trembled. "Please, do you have a phone? Mine's dead and nobody's stopping." Ezekiel's eyes swept over the SUV. Older model, front tire half flat, engine probably overheated. He looked at the kid. Blonde hair, too thin for this weather, clutching a stuffed bear with one arm. "My phone's in the truck," Ezekiel said calmly, "but I think I can help you better than that. Mind if I take a look?" The woman hesitated. She glanced at his skin, his boots, the toolbox in his hand. Then, almost like she caught herself doing something she shouldn't, she nodded quickly. "Please, I don't know what happened. It just started smoking." Ezekiel nodded once. No fuss, no smile, just focus. He popped the hood and stepped into the familiar silence of broken machines. That silence he'd known since he was 15 and first held a wrench to earn gas money. The engine hissed. He examined the coolant line, ran his hand along the radiator. The hose clamp had slipped. "Easy fix?" He turned back. "Gonna need some water to cool it. Got a bottle?" The woman fumbled through her purse, pulled out a half-drunk bottle of Dasani. He took it, poured it carefully into the reservoir. Steam hissed up, but less than before. "You'll be all right once this cools. Just keep the heater running when you drive. Pulls heat from the engine." She blinked. You're just helping, like that?" Ezekiel glanced at the boy, who was now watching him with something between awe and confusion. Then he looked back at the woman and shrugged. "Sometimes," he said, voice low and steady, "God sends a stranger your way, just to remind you the world ain't all bad." He turned to leave, but the boy's voice stopped him. "Sir?" The kid stepped forward. "What's your name?" Ezekiel smiled, just a little. "Name's Ezekiel." The boy grinned. "Thank you, Mr. Ezekiel." He nodded, tipped his head. Then he walked back to his truck, slid into the driver's seat and drove off, dust curling in his wake. Behind him, the woman stood frozen, her son holding her hand tightly. Claire Hastings sat at her desk, eyes locked on the blinking cursor of an empty document. The newsroom around her buzzed with the usual Monday chaos, phones ringing, editors shouting across desks, the scent of burnt coffee lingering in the air. But her thoughts were stuck on the side of that highway. and on the man who had fixed her car without asking for a single thing in return. She had thanked him. Yes, she had even meant to offer money, but the words had tangled in her throat. Something about the calm way he looked at her, then at her son, had quieted her in a way no interview or press briefing ever could. Logan hadn't stopped talking about him all morning. Mr. Ezekiel said God sends people. Do you think that's real, Mom? Claire didn't answer then, but now, back in the world of cynicism and deadlines, she felt a strange pull. So she opened a tab and typed, Ezekiel, Georgia mechanic. Nothing specific. She added volunteer to the search. A few local community board posts popped up. Someone named Ezekiel B. had once repaired a school bus on a freezing January morning, no charge. Another post showed a blurry photo of a man standing beside an elderly woman's Buick, her hand resting gently on his arm. The caption read, "He wouldn't take a dime. Said it was just the right thing to do." Claire leaned forward. Her reporter instincts sharpened like a blade. This wasn't a one-time act of kindness. This was a pattern. She clicked deeper, traced a digital breadcrumb trail through community forums and garage sales groups, all unsigned or attributed to someone only referred to as Zeke. Each post sounded the same, someone stranded, someone desperate, and then this man showing up quietly and leaving just as quickly. No business name, no social media, no phone number, just stories. She opened her notebook, flipped to a clean page, and wrote Zeke at the top. Then, highway, Sunday, white SUV, me. She stared at the words. She didn't know why this mattered so much, but it did. She had covered elections, corruption scandals, hospital mismanagement, but this felt personal, too human to ignore. She picked up her phone, dialed a contact from her feature desk. Rich, I need you to check something for me. Look for any public records, local or statewide, on a man named Ezekiel Brown, possibly in or near Dobbins County. Might be listed as a mechanic, maybe even unlicensed. The voice on the other end grumbled. That's pretty broad. So narrow it, Claire snapped, softer than she meant. Try community work, maybe churches. Look for mentions in local newsletters. She hung up before he could argue more. An hour passed. 2. Claire barely touched her coffee. Then Rich called back. You're not going to believe this. The guy's got no business listed, but there's a church bulletin from 2 years ago. Mentions a brother Ezekiel Brown who runs something called Hands of Grace. No website, no address, it's just a name in the middle of a thank you note from a retired vet. Said this group fixed his truck when the VA couldn't. Claire's heartbeat quickened. Hands of Grace? Yeah. No one registered under that name in the state. It's like they don't officially exist. That night, Claire drove through a part of town she hadn't visited in years. Dobbins County wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't polished either. Cracked sidewalks, flickering street lamps, old diners with handwritten hours taped to windows. She followed vague directions from an anonymous commenter who claimed the truck guys met behind a shuttered warehouse near the train tracks on Thursdays. But tonight was Monday. She sat in her car anyway, engine off, hands clenched on the steering wheel. Then a pair of headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. A dark blue van parked beside her. The driver stepped out, broad shoulders, heavy boots, the same walk. It was him. Ezekiel. He carried a small cardboard box, a toolkit, and wore that same expression she remembered, steady, unreadable. Claire rolled down her window slowly. Ezekiel, she called out, nervous despite herself. He turned. For a moment he didn't speak, then he nodded. Didn't expect to see you again. Claire stepped out. The wind had picked up. I've been looking for you. He raised a brow. That right? She swallowed. I wanted to thank you properly, and I think there's a story here. About what you do, the people you help. Ezekiel set the box on the ground beside the van. Ain't no story, just doing what needs doing. That's exactly why it is a story, she said. People need to know good things are still happening, that people like you still exist. He looked down for a moment, then back at her. You write stories for the paper? Yes, she said, unsure if she should add more. And I'd like to write yours. Yours and whoever else is part of Hands of Grace. The name made him flinch slightly, but he didn't correct her. He stood quiet for a long beat. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. You show up here Thursday, 8 o'clock. Don't wear heels. He picked up his box and walked inside the building, leaving the door cracked behind him. Claire stood still, heart pounding. She hadn't expected that answer. Hadn't expected him to say yes, but something told her, deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. And whatever she was about to uncover, it was going to matter more than anything she'd written before. Thursday came with the first rain of the season, light but steady, turning the roads slick and reflective under the streetlights. Claire parked her car 2 blocks from the warehouse. She had followed Ezekiel's instructions. No heels, no notepad in plain sight, just a small recorder tucked in her jacket and boots that had seen better days. She checked her watch. 7:57. The warehouse looked abandoned from the outside. Brick walls darkened by time, graffiti faded on the loading dock, but light glowed from a half-covered window, pale and flickering like a heartbeat under a thin shirt. She walked up, heart thudding louder with each step, and knocked once on the side door. It creaked open. A boy, maybe 17, stood there. White, tall, freckles on his cheeks. He gave her a cautious glance but stepped aside without a word. Inside, the smell hit first. Motor oil, metal shavings, dust, and a hint of something warm, like cheap coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of folding tables stacked with wrenches, hoses, spark plugs. In the corner, someone stirred a pot on a camping stove. She counted 7 people, all men, different backgrounds, one in a faded army jacket, one with a long white beard, another in scrubs, like he'd just come off a shift. And in the middle, bent over the exposed belly of an engine resting on a wheeled cart, was Ezekiel. He looked up when he saw her, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked over. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. Claire offered a faint smile. "You said 8. "I'm here." He nodded, then looked past her. "Gentlemen, this is Claire. She's a writer. Told her she could watch, long as she keeps her questions for later." The old man in the army jacket raised a brow. "A reporter?" Ezekiel held up a hand. "She ain't here to cause trouble." Claire kept her hands visible, voice calm. "I'm not here for a gotcha piece. I just want to understand. Tell it right." The others returned to their work, not quite convinced, but not hostile either. One man gestured toward a stool near the wall. "You can sit there. Just don't trip over the cords." She sat, taking everything in. For the next hour, she didn't speak, just listened, watched. The group worked in pairs, repairing alternators, rewrapping wires, sorting used parts into bins marked salvageable and scrap. They moved like people who had done this 100 times without needing to talk much. There was a rhythm, unspoken but real. At one point, the young kid from the door pulled out a donation box. It had dents, stickers peeling off, and inside was a plastic bag of cash, small bills, a couple of coins. He walked over to Ezekiel and whispered something. Ezekiel took the bag, counted it quickly, and nodded. "Gas for pickups this weekend. And that belt for Mrs. Davis's van. We'll stretch the rest." Claire couldn't stay silent. "Is that all donation money?" Ezekiel turned, met her gaze. "Some. The rest's ours. We put in what we can." "You pay for the parts out of pocket?" "Most times. Folks need their cars to get to work. VA don't cover transmission failure. Single moms can't fix tie rods with prayer." The man in scrubs chimed in, voice low and tired. "Hands of Grace ain't a charity. We just fill the cracks the system leaves behind." Claire leaned forward. "But why stay invisible? Why not organize, get funding, go public?" The army vet laughed without smiling. "You ever seen how fast a thing gets corrupted once the suits show up?" Another voice added, "We help folks without paperwork, no questions. If we take money from the state, we have to start asking questions. That's not who we are." Ezekiel stepped closer, voice firm. We're not here for headlines. We're here so people like Miss Ivy don't lose their job because the bus broke down, so kids like Logan ain't stuck on the side of the highway wondering if the world forgot 'em." The mention of her son made Claire pause. She stared down at her hands. The warehouse suddenly felt warmer, smaller, more real. Ezekiel saw the shift. "You still want to write about it?" Claire met his eyes. "Yes, but only if I get it right, only if it helps." He nodded slowly. "Then you come with us Saturday. We got 5 stops. You see what we do, not just here but out there. Then you write it." The tension eased. The old man poured her a cup of weak coffee. The teenager smiled for the first time. As the rain continued outside, the warehouse buzzed with tools and talk. Claire took her recorder out and pressed record, letting it roll in her pocket, not just to capture sound, but to remember the silence that carried just as much weight. She hadn't just found a story. She had walked into a world no one had bothered to see. Saturday morning came cold and clear, the kind of southern chill that snuck under collars and settled into bones. Claire stood in the gravel lot behind the warehouse at 7 sharp, breath visible in the crisp air. A caravan of 4 vehicles idled in the background, 2 old trucks, a battered van, and Ezekiel's black pickup from the highway. He stepped out of the driver's seat, thermos in hand, and nodded toward her. "You bring gloves?" She held up a pair. "And boots." "Good," he said. "We don't just watch on Saturdays." The others arrived in quiet succession. The kid from Thursday, Micah, she'd learned, climbed into the back of the van with a crate of brake pads. The Army vet, who went by Wilson, carried 2 gas cans. Ezekiel handed Claire a folded clipboard. "Addresses, notes on the cars, first stop's 15 minutes out." They drove in silence, save for a gospel station playing low in Ezekiel's truck. Claire rode beside him, flipping through the paperwork. The names blurred together. Angela, single mother of 3. Mr. Torres, veteran on disability. Darlene, recently evicted. All of them with failing cars, no money, and nowhere else to go. The first stop was a 1-story home with chipped paint and a rusted swing set in the yard. Angela came out holding a toddler, her face drawn but kind. She greeted Ezekiel with a hug, then turned shy when she saw Claire. "You from the city?" "Sort of," Claire said, "just here to learn." Angela nodded, stepped back as the group got to work. Her van needed a new belt and a patched tire. Ezekiel and Wilson worked in rhythm. No words, just motion. Micah jacked up the side while Clea held the flashlight steady. Angela leaned closer, whispering. "I tried saving for the repairs, I really did, but rent went up and daycare—" She stopped, eyes watery. "I would have lost my job Monday, but Ezekiel said not to worry." Claire nodded slowly. "He seems to say that a lot." The second stop was tougher. Mr. Torres, a former Marine with stiff joints and a stubborn streak, refused help until Wilson showed him the parts were already paid for. "No charity," he muttered, pulling Claire aside. "I earned my stripes. I just got knocked down. That man?" He nodded at Ezekiel. "He doesn't treat you like you're broken. He treats you like you still matter." By the 4th stop, Claire wasn't just watching. She was passing tools, holding flashlights, handing bottles of water to the elderly woman who insisted on making them bologna sandwiches while they worked. Ezekiel didn't say much, but every now and then he'd nod toward her, as if silently acknowledging her effort. They finished the last stop at dusk, under a sky turning pink and gold. The final job had taken over 2 hours, replacing a radiator in a narrow driveway, while kids peeked through the windows, giggling at Claire's oil-smudged cheeks. Back at the warehouse, Claire leaned against the wall, exhausted. Her fingers ached, her back stiff, but she felt clean, honest, like every hour spent writing policy exposés and hollow op-eds had just been preparing her for this. Ezekiel handed her a bottle of water and sat beside her on the low step. For a long moment they said nothing. Then Claire turned to him. "You could have asked for help a long time ago, applied for grants, started a non-profit." Ezekiel shook his head. "Then it becomes about paperwork, meetings, salaries." We're not here to build a brand. We're here to make sure Miss Angela gets to work and Mr. Torres doesn't miss his doctor's appointment." She looked at him carefully. "But there are more people like them. And not enough of you." Ezekiel's voice softened. "I know. That's why I let you come." Claire blinked. "You want the story told. I want the truth told, that people still care, that we don't have to wait on some system to save us." She looked down at her hands, oil-stained, trembling slightly from fatigue, then back at him. "I'll write it, but I won't call it charity. I'll call it what it is: dignity." Ezekiel nodded once. "That's all we ever wanted." The warehouse quieted as the others cleaned up. Claire stepped outside for air. The sky was nearly dark now, the street lights flickering on one by one. She pulled out her phone, opened a new document, and began typing, not with the cold detachment of a reporter, but with the voice of someone who had seen the hands, the effort, the choice to care when no one was watching. She typed, "They don't wear uniforms. They don't ask for thanks. But somewhere between the cracked pavement and worn-out engines, these men are building something far stronger than machines. They're building trust." And for the first time in a long time, she believed the words as she wrote them. Claire hit publish on the story just before midnight. She didn't expect much. It was a quiet piece. No scandal, no outrage, just the kind of slow-burn human story most readers skipped on their rush to politics and crime. But she wrote it anyway. Truthfully, honestly, every detail. Ezekiel's steady hands, Wilson's gruff kindness, Micah's quiet resolve. She titled it Hands of Grace, the Mechanics of Dignity. Then she went to bed. By morning her phone was buzzing off the nightstand, emails stacked like bricks in her inbox, texts from colleagues, editors, even strangers. The story had been picked up by a national veterans group. Then a parenting blog. Then a famous radio host read a passage on air, choking up when quoting Ezekiel's line, "We fill the cracks the system leaves behind." By noon, Claire stood in front of her editor's office, holding her laptop as if it might explode. Her boss, a hard-nosed woman who rarely smiled, looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "You wrote something that matters," she said quietly. "Get ready for the flood." And it came. Donations poured in. Mechanics from other states reached out, asking how to start their own Hands of Grace chapter. One auto parts supplier offered lifetime discounts. A non-profit legal group volunteered to handle registration and paperwork, no charge. Someone from a national education fund emailed Claire directly and asked for contact information for Ezekiel's daughter. Claire didn't answer right away. She drove to the warehouse first. The group had gathered again, this time without hoods open or wrenches in hand. They stood around a table piled high with envelopes, packages, and printouts of news articles. Ezekiel looked like he hadn't slept. Claire stepped in, uncertain, until Wilson broke the silence. "You went and told the world." Claire's voice caught. "I tried to tell it right." Micah held up a letter. A woman from Chicago wrote that her husband cried reading this. He was a mechanic, too. Lost his job, said this gave him hope again. Ezekiel hadn't moved. He stared down at a letter with trembling fingers. Claire recognized the seal. It was from the governor's office. "Won't they want to give us some award?" he murmured. "Invite us to the Capitol. Say we're an example of community leadership." Wilson scoffed, but it lacked its usual bite. "Took him long enough." Ezekiel looked up at Claire, eyes heavier than she'd ever seen them. "This ain't why we did it." "I know," she said, "but maybe now you can do more." He shook his head. "I don't want cameras in people's yards. Don't want reporters turning Miss Darlene's story into some pity segment." "You don't have to," Claire said softly. "You just have to accept the help that's being offered. For Naomi. For the next family stuck on the side of the road." He was silent for a long time. Then he exhaled. "We're still going to do the work, same way. Just maybe now with better tools." That weekend, the story made national headlines. The photo of Ezekiel leaning over Angela's van, grease on his brow, a little girl peeking from behind the curtain, became the image of hope on morning shows and podcasts. Local schools invited him to speak. Anonymous donors covered the next 2 years of Naomi's tuition. A scholarship fund was established in the name of Hands of Grace. Claire watched it all unfold from a distance, never placing herself at the center. She'd written hundreds of stories in her life, exposed corruption, questioned power, but none of them had left a mark like this. 2 weeks later, she returned to the highway where it all began, the same curve, the same stretch of road. She parked on the shoulder and stepped out. The wind was stronger now, colder. She thought about how easy it had been to drive past that day, how many others had, and how one man chose to stop. Logan's voice echoed in her memory. "Do you think that's real, Mom?" Yes, she thought now, it's real. It was never about headlines or handouts. It was about one man kneeling beside a broken engine because he believed no one deserved to be left behind. Claire pulled out her phone, opened the article one last time, and read her final paragraph aloud to the wind. The truth is, grace doesn't always arrive in choir robes or polished speeches. Sometimes it shows up in oil-stained boots and a borrowed wrench, with a quiet promise, "I see you, I won't leave you behind." She closed her eyes. The world was loud, divided, harsh. But here, on this stretch of cracked pavement, a quiet roar still echoed. And someone had answered. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.